Well, I fully agree with you that I'm just telling you where the state of the world is today. Actually, those cattle do have RFI sires that are tracked, but that's part of the research project. But what I was trying to say is I've got RFI scores and I've got ADG, and even if you told me that as a producer, I'm not sure how much I could pay you. So I'm just, frankly, that was my crude way of trying to start with an index and saying I can't get there. I'm not there. I frankly didn't expect to get there. But if you look at ADG and RFI, I can't purchase your cattle different. I am running into people talking about RFI. It's kind of funny. Some of them actually talk about, oh, we've got great positive RFIs, and you're going, okay. But honestly, even if you told me, boy, I've got a great RFI herd, I can't differentiate how I pay. And that's what I'm trying, that's the point I'm trying to make. Honestly, I'm still waiting for the parentage to make that evaluation. It's not there yet. So I will be doing that, absolutely. So I hope so, but I'm not there yet, honestly.
Yeah, I'll comment a little bit on that. We have in a small number of cases, and I might have shown a little bit of that information, about 22 sires, the progeny of 22 sires that have gone through Stewart's feedlot. We do have the value on them, and there is a difference. Those efficient sires have lower feed to gain ratios, and unfortunately, we haven't taken it right to the slaughter endpoint. That's a good point. However, in that feed test period, they consumed around $10 or $11 per head less feed. So it is being translated. I do have to agree with Stuart. When it comes down to the feedlot, the signal is missing for the cow-calf producer. Even if it's the best trait in the world, the signal for feed efficiency is missing. And it's a very good point.
I guess I'd like to make a comment that we keep still talking about, because feed efficiency's always been a feedlot trait. And this is not a feedlot trait. This is a cow-calf trait. And it is going to make you money in your cow-calf herd. Will a feedlot, like if my whole herd gets more efficient, then maybe you'll be able to pay me more at some point. But if we were to improve the feed efficiency of all the herds, then you still wouldn't be able to pay an individual producer a premium. But I think that feed efficiency has always been thought of as a feedlot trait, but this is a cow trait.
I would like to comment. I agree with you, it's a hurdle. I just honestly, short of legislating it, and boy would I go nuts if that happened. Well, those who know me, I'd go nuts. But short of legislating, the way I think that we could see change is if I could identify it at the marketplace, it would show up, the good breeders would do it. You know what, they're going to pull up the whole bull population. I don't think we're going to get to the optimal point, I will concur, but I just don't know how you're going to get everybody to do all this record keeping. It's not going to happen with our herd size.
Yeah, I would have a comment there, and it would be right now we have our major breed seed stock associations that are getting on to the business of record keeping and measuring many of their young breeding bulls for feed intake and whatever feed efficiency trait they want. There will be, I'll give you an example, over the next 3 years, the Hereford Association, with a project that they've got going, will measure 900 bulls and will rank them for feed efficiency. Though that will be valuable. The same is true for Simmental, Angus, Limousin. The whole lot of the breed associations are coming on side, and with hybrid seed stock producers such as Beef Booster and Desiree Ranches. So there are innovative groups that are taking this on full scale. Will we ever get to everybody? No, it's very unlikely.
Well, I think a combination of things has begun to get going. The extension work of Susan and your group, and there's more ink on feed efficiency and productivity, in the news these days. But it's a combination of education to the grassroots level producers. The seed stock people need to take the time or be left in the dust, one or the other, to identify the right kind. And then also the feedlot operators that can segregate different groups and show some net returns is going to lay the foundation to keep this thing snowballing. But the other species, swine and poultry and them, have been doing this light years earlier, and here we in the beef industry are just starting to think about it when we're paying through the nose for feed that we don't have to. But yeah, we got to gather the data and educate the people on how to use it, and hope we live long enough to see the benefits of it.
You expose the animals to the environment in which they're brought up in, the cows, and the ones that aren't maintaining body condition score aren't going to rebreed, and they're culled out of the herd. However, in saying that, we still see, after we do that within our own research herds or the Kinsella herd or any of the other herds we've been working with, we still see dramatic differences in feed intake relative to their production. And what we're trying to do is get at those. We're trying to find rapid methodologies for finding those cows that still do that. They still seem to get through in the hard times, but you know something? We still feed cows even in the hard times pretty well, right? Mm-hmm. If winters get bad, we feed more. If the pastures get bad, we move them somewhere else. So I'm not really sure that we're exposing those animals to the harshest conditions that we could have, and therefore getting the most efficient cows that we could get, right? So this is one of the methods, and I guess we could say is, how do we do this quickly without feed intake testing all of our animals? I'm probably getting into trouble here. However, there are methodologies. Estimated breeding values of the replacement heifer is one way. There are other technologies such as possibly, let us say, infrared thermography, or the application of a grow-safe technology. So there are other indicator traits that we might be able to use to get at a more feed-efficient herd quickly.
I was thinking actually about the first discussion. I thought it's a painful birth in Canada too, not just in the U.S. Huh? Actually, the data set that we've looked at that may speak to that is there's one bull test facility in particular that we crunched the numbers for on RFI. And they'll have about at least 8 breeds in each test. And I think with the exception of one time, every time they've done the test, if you look at the average of the breed, Hereford will be the most negative RFI. And if you think about the states, and you think about Hereford making it in the states, think if I ask you the question, which breed in the United States would you think would have had selection pressure put on it, that it would have the most negative RFI, what breed would you pick? I would say Hereford, and the reason being they were out west, they had to deal with the western winters out there, and they had to figure a way to be efficient. Now, some of the Hereford dislikes might say that's a milk production phenomenon. That's a joke. That's a joke, all right? But the point I want to make is we'll see that prove out in terms of the breed. But yet if we look at individuals that will have, and whatever breed might have the most positive RFI, there will be a Hereford with an RFI just as positive as any other animal that's tested in that group. And the breed that had the worst RFI will have an animal that has just as negative of an RFI as any other breed in that group. So if you select on populations, if I'm going to interpret what John said, you could take that, you could probably have some influence in that, maybe like you were saying, a weak R-squared would result from that, but you're not going to be able to identify individual animals in there and which ones are more efficient. And if you throw fall calving and milk production into that, that really throws a monkey wrench in it, and I think that's going to take any visual assessment out in terms of what those animals are. So I agree with John. You'd see some movement, but it's not going to be enough that you're going to be able to say, I can remove the lower third or of the inefficient animals from the herd. I just don't see a visual appraisal being able to do that.
We have conducted the old cross flip of studies where you do, okay, we've got bulls or steers on a finishing diet or high grain diet. Then we flip them over to a forage diet, vice versa, and all combinations in between, right? So that you can compare. There is no doubt there's re-ranking, and some significant re-ranking. So we'll have a small percentage, 15 or so percent, that could be on one diet, let's say a forage diet, would rank the most efficient. You flip them over to a concentrate diet, they'll become the least efficient. Now that's not unusual. You might say, well, oh my God, that's bad, let's just throw the trait out and start over again. However, all traits re-rank. Average daily gain does exactly the same thing, and it's because one thing we don't control when we do those studies is maturity. The animal ages, and so we're on a different part of the growth curve and in terms of the feed efficiency. Nevertheless, re-ranking is an issue, and how I would say for you to deal with that is if you plan to use an animal, your breeding herd is going to be under an extensive range condition environment, have your bulls tested as close to a higher forage-based diet and still getting the gains that they need to get to be able to express growth. So maybe a higher forage-based diet, less grain. And so that's probably as good as you're going to do for now. But there is no doubt that there is some re-ranking in terms of feed intake as well as growth.
Can I just finish up on that? Actually, the grant that Taylor has, that's a big part of their phenotyping. They're doing both forage, and half of the phenotypes are forage, half are on grain-based. I agree with what John said about the potential for re-ranking. Even if you held them on the same diet, there's potential for re-ranking at different times, and I think that's one thing I want to go back to. The other thing is you'll have the re-ranking, but at least the things we've seen, albeit just a couple of experiments, what we've seen is when we've ranked those heifers, and they would be more grain-heavy type diet, the one slide I showed was with Hereford cows and dry and lactating, the heifers, the Sim-Angus heifers, and we've looked at forage intake of them. Once we group those now into either efficient or inefficient groups, and we look at forage intake with them, you'll have variation among individuals, but when you look at them as, if you will, a small herd, they stick with what they did on grain, pretty well what they're going to do on forage. So certainly individual re-ranking, but you'll see the means follow through. I think it's kind of the same message on those offspring. You'll see a lot of ranking in offspring, but when you look at the average of that progeny, it kind of follows suit. But that's, of the data we have, that's the best I can answer that.
Yeah, the information is published, Journal of Animal Science, and it's by Obi Durana is the head author, and he's now at Brandon working with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So there's one, and I know there's other studies that look at that as well. So the correlation you're meaning, what's the correlation between the intake on the forage-based diet versus that on a high grain-based diet? You're testing my memory, which isn't very good, but I would say that these would be moderate. These would be moderate to strong correlations.
Thanks, Siobhan.
He said 0.56. Okay, that's pretty close. Moderate to.
I was actually thinking 0.55, but.
I think I could barely hear you, but let me just paraphrase. So you're going off the observation that in mature cattle, efficient cattle tend to maintain their body condition better. They're fatter, and you're suggesting how do we justify that with health concerns for beef? Have I got that correct? Okay. So this is the difference in the physiological state of animals. When animals are growing, so they're younger and they're growing, they're essentially putting down more lean and more and a little bit of fat. However, by the time that they're slaughtered or harvested, their fat content isn't that great. And so at a growing phase, we do not see any relationship between residual feed intake and other measures of efficiency and fatness. Okay? So you shouldn't be worried about when you talk about the food you eat. Where we see it with mature cows are essentially, they don't grow anymore. They're not growing, and what they're doing is any excess energy that they are consuming will go to body fat. Now, culled cows, have a fair amount of body fat depending on their finish. And but in our growing animals, we shouldn't be concerned about that relationship to health. Am I muddled around that enough? That's exactly a project that Cheng-Shi Li is working on, and in other words, the relationship of RFI to the fatty acid profile. It's one of the harder things you'd want to do. Cows have a great tendency to throw feed all over the darn place, so that is a problem, feeding them in grow safe. However, we found ways around that. All I can say is that what we measure in a replacement heifer, and that what we then measure when she is a 4, 5, 6-year-old cow, that translates. The repeatability of the trait is very high. So if you have a estimated breeding value on a bull that produces efficient daughters, you would expect them to be efficient as cows. Measuring RFI in heifers versus lactating or dry cows. All the work we do is with dry cows. And we want to stay away from those other production periods as much as we can. I know that there's a few studies that are measuring feed intake all year round, and love to see those, but they're ongoing, I would assume, right? But we just dry cows. Validity, the predictability of molecular breeding values for residual feed intake or many other traits. And you know, in the past, when I have looked at, and people that I've worked with have looked at the association between actual data from an unrelated population and the molecular breeding value, the genetic correlations have been around 5%. They account for 5% of the genetic variability. That was in the past, and many of you will say that's not very good, and why are we spending all our money on that when it's not very good? Some of the more recent information is indicating that instead of being at 5%, we're starting to move up into the area of 13, 14, and in some herds, in some of the commercial herds that we've been working with, we've actually accounted for 20% and higher in the genetic variability. That value is useful. That is useful. So as we move forward with genomic technology and sequencing and imputation, we are going to, I think, we're going to get better relationships. In other words, the accuracy of our estimated, our molecular breeding values are going to get better. Right now, you know, marginal. But in the future, 4 or 5 years, maybe less, they're going to be where they're going, I think they're going to be very useful. But it depends on the population in which they're applied.
I don't have anything really better to add to that. I think the one thing I would say, in looking at it more simplistically as a nutritionist would look at it, is it's the number of events that's going to affect this one trait that we're measuring. When we get back to the discussion of forage versus concentrate, it may be something like dilution rate from the rumen, digestive capacity for fiber, that would never show up if we're doing a grain type test, and it's a big factor if we go to forage. So I think one of the problems has been on the marker side, as I look at, is trying to sort through all those and make sense of which ones are lighting up at a particular time. So I think on the genetic side, it's more of a question of when than if. that's going to come into play. I think that, again, using them and thinking about from a production standpoint, my opinion is we're not there yet, and we've got to have something better to be impactful. On the discussion of the value, what intrigues me about that is efficiency is going to win. I don't know how, but efficiency is going to win. There's not an industry that I know of that efficiency at some point in time doesn't win. Now, I don't know what that blueprint's going to look like. So, I mean, it's a great discussion, you're talking about that. But I think what intrigues me about that is I've been approached from the other side, people that have feedlots or in the business of procuring cattle. They want a marker. They want to be able to determine that. But the last person they want to tell is the person they're buying the animals from. So it works both ways. And that, if we're real honest, that may be part of the slowness of adapting how we make those things in, because there is money there. But I'm not sure it's always altruistic in sharing that profit.
Just to paraphrase, if we use genetic markers in the narrowest sense, like, for example, a genetic marker for residual feed intake, and we start heavily selecting on the basis of it, what would happen? Right. So it wouldn't be good, because that's essentially the single trait selection. And so markers, that information coming from the molecular side will be combined with what comes from the phenotype side, and we will have a genomically enhanced estimated breeding value. That will then go into a multi-trait selection index, just like estimated breeding values are now. So you would never look at it from the narrow sense. You'd only look at it from the whole animal profitability. So if your breeding goal was to have very, very good cows that rebred and produced a weaned calf of a great weight every year at less feed, then that would be the molecular, or the estimated breeding values that are enhanced with genomics that you would use, similar with the feedlot side. So you would never, ever go at it from a narrow sense. I do get your point, though, about single trait selection, going after one bit of technology. We could say the same thing if we went after IGF-1. What happens if I have an indicator trait that's called IGF-1 and we start selecting on the basis of it? And Australia can tell us all about that. It's not good, right? So we're aware of that, and it's a great question, and we have to always be concerned. Never would any geneticist here that I know do that. So what they would do is they would enhance that data with with whatever pedigree information is available, whatever phenotypes being, we actually measured it using GrowSafe, and we would complement that with genomic molecular information. All of that goes together to make, hopefully, a more accurate estimated breeding value. So that's how it would be handled. It would never, ever be, oh, we've got a molecular breeding value with a 10% accuracy. Let's go for it. Yeah, no, that's not how it would be implemented.
If there was an EPD for saleability, that'd be your #1 choice. You got to stay in business first of all, but there isn't. So I personally like to look at all the information on an individual item and somehow put it all together. The way I would suggest to a commercial cow-calf guy, or a cow-calf guy that feeds his own cattle and even has a branded beef outlet, you would take each trait and select the animals that fit best and put it in the whole system. In effect, you're designing your own index, if you want to call it that, but what suits you best is to gather as much accurate information as you can, and that means, year after year, crop after crop, generation after generation, if you can, but you got to start somewhere. And that starts with using as much as you can. If you're going to, I gather identity DNA marker, we get scores for many traits. It's not an end-all. There is not one trait that's an end-all. Some of our top RFI bulls that have come through the test, we've castrated because they are not as saleable as they need to be for one reason or another. So that's disappointing when on the marketing end of things, but that's reality, and we use a combination of traits in selecting ours. But if somebody is needing to pump up one certain factor, well, here's the data and go to it. Use that bull for that thing, not an end-all, but for that thing you can use the data.